Before we begin, find a quiet place, turn the lights down, and make yourself comfortable. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps us more than you know. 5 creepy deep-sea stories scientists can't explain. Story 1. The Mariana Trench Recording. I still can't listen to ocean sounds without feeling my chest tighten. My name is Dr. Sarah Chin, and I was part of the deep-sea acoustic research team stationed on the research vessel Atlantis II in March 2019. We were conducting a routine study of bioluminescent patterns in the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of our oceans, when we captured something that made 3 of our team members quit marine biology altogether. I'd spent 7 years studying deep-sea ecosystems, but nothing prepared me for what happened that night. The Mariana Trench had always fascinated me since childhood. This alien world right here on Earth, deeper than Mount Everest is tall, with pressures that could crush a human body in milliseconds. We'd been anchored above the Challenger Deep for 3 weeks, sending down our remotely operated vehicles equipped with cameras and hydrophones, collecting data on the mysterious sounds of the abyss. It was 2:47 a.m. when our hydrophone array picked up the sound. I remember the exact time because I'd been about to end my shift and grab some sleep. Marcus, our audio technician, called me back to the monitoring station with an urgency in his voice I'd never heard before. His face was pale in the blue glow of the computer screens. "Sarah, you need to hear this," he said, his hand trembling slightly as he adjusted the playback controls. The sound that came through the speakers made every hair on my body stand up. It started as a low-frequency rumble, barely audible, vibrating through the ship's hull. Then it changed. It became something else entirely. A pattern. A rhythm. Something that sounded almost like breathing. But not human breathing. This was massive, deliberate, and impossibly deep. Each inhalation seemed to last for 30 seconds, followed by an exhalation that carried with it a series of clicking sounds, almost like Morse code. The pattern repeated 3 times, then stopped completely. "What depth is this from?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry. Marcus checked the readings. 35,800 feet. Right at the bottom. "Sarah, there's something else." He pulled up the spectrogram analysis on the second monitor. "Look at the frequency pattern. It's too regular to be geological. Too complex to be any known marine animal." I leaned closer to the screen. He was right. The sound waves formed patterns that looked almost mathematical in their precision. Each click within the breathing cycle varied in pitch and duration, but followed a sequence that repeated with exact timing. Natural sounds don't do that. Even whale songs, as complex as they are, have variations. This was exact, down to the millisecond. How big would something need to be to produce a sound at this frequency and amplitude? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Marcus ran the calculations. The color drained from his face. "Based on the resonance and the pressure readings, Sarah, it would have to be at least 400 feet long. Maybe larger." We sat in silence, letting that sink in. The blue whale, the largest animal ever known to exist, reaches about 100 feet. What Marcus was suggesting was something 4 times that size, living 7 miles below the surface, in complete darkness, where the pressure would flatten a submarine like a tin can. "We need to send down camera unit 3, I said. "The one with the high-intensity floods." "Are you sure that's a good idea?" Marcus looked at me with genuine fear in his eyes. "We have to know." It took us 40 minutes to prep the ROV and begin the descent. Dr. James Whitmore, our team lead, had joined us by then, along with Katie, our marine biologist. We watched the depth counter climb, 1,000 feet, 5,000, 10,000. The camera showed nothing but darkness and the occasional bioluminescent jellyfish drifting past like ghostly apparitions. At 20,000 feet, the hydrophone picked up the sound again. This time it was louder, more insistent. The breathing pattern was faster now, almost agitated. The clicking sounds had changed too, becoming more frequent, more urgent. "It knows we're there," Katie whispered. "It can sense the ROV." "That's impossible," Dr. Whitmore said, but his voice lacked conviction. At this depth, in complete darkness, the lights on the ROV suddenly illuminated something massive moving past the camera. Just a glimpse, a flash of something pale and enormous, but it was enough. The creature, whatever it was, had skin that looked almost translucent, with bioluminescent patterns running along what might have been its flank. The patterns pulsed in rhythm with the clicking sounds we were hearing. "Did you see that?" Marcus was frantically typing, trying to capture a still frame from the video feed. "Jesus Christ, did you all see that?" Before anyone could answer, the ROV began to shake violently. The camera feed showed darkness again, but something was out there, circling. We could hear it through the hydrophone now, the breathing sound so close it distorted the speakers. Then came something new, a sound like grinding metal mixed with something organic, something alive. The pressure sensors on the ROV started going haywire. The external pressure was increasing, even though the depth reading remained constant at 34,000 feet. Whatever was out there, it was creating its own pressure field. "Bring it up," Dr. Whitmore ordered. "Bring it up now!" Marcus started the ascent protocol, but the ROV wasn't responding normally. It was moving upward, but something was following it. The camera caught glimpses of it in the peripheral floods, something serpentine, undulating, with dozens of appendages that looked like a nightmare fusion of tentacles and fins. The bioluminescent patterns on its body were pulsing faster now, and the clicking sounds had become almost deafening through our speakers. At 28,000 feet, the ROV's cable suddenly went slack. The camera feed showed nothing but open water for a moment, then slowly began to rotate. We realized with horror that something had grabbed the ROV and was turning it around, positioning the camera to face downward, back toward the abyss. That's when we saw them. Not just one creature, but dozens. They were rising from the depths like a living curtain of flesh, their bodies creating a bioluminescent display that looked almost like aurora borealis underwater. The largest one, the one we'd first detected, was in the center, and it was massive beyond comprehension. Our size estimates had been conservative. This thing was easily 600 feet long, with a body that seemed to shift and change shape, almost like it wasn't entirely solid. The clicking sound stopped. The breathing stopped. Everything went silent for exactly 10 seconds. Then the creature opened something at its anterior end. I say opened, because I don't know what else to call it. It wasn't a mouth, at least not like any mouth I'd ever seen. It was a circular aperture that expanded and contracted, ringed with thousands of tiny, glowing points that might have been teeth or sensors or something else entirely. From this aperture came a sound that I can still hear in my nightmares. It was the sound of every human voice I'd ever heard, all speaking at once, layered over each other in a cacophony that somehow formed words. English words. 3 words, repeated over and over. "We are many!" The ROV cable snapped. The feed went dead. We stood in the monitoring room, frozen, none of us able to speak. The hydrophone was still active, still recording, and we could hear them down there, all of those creatures, making sounds that resembled human speech but distorted, like audio played backward and forward simultaneously. Dr. Whitmore immediately ordered us to retrieve all equipment and prepared to leave the area. It took us 6 hours to pull up the remaining sensors and secure the ship. During that entire time, the hydrophone continued picking up those sounds. They followed us as we motored away, getting fainter but never completely disappearing until we were over 100 nautical miles from the trench. When we returned to port, Dr. Whitmore confiscated all the recordings. He said it was for analysis, but I think he was afraid of what would happen if those sounds got out. The official report stated that we'd experienced equipment malfunction due to the extreme pressures and that the audio anomalies were the result of data corruption. But 3 weeks after we returned, I received an encrypted email from Marcus. He'd kept a copy of the recording on a personal drive, against protocol. He'd been running analysis on it, trying to make sense of what we'd heard. He'd discovered something that made him leave his position at the Institute immediately. The clicking patterns weren't random. They were a language. Marcus had fed them through a pattern recognition algorithm designed for cryptography, and it had found matches. The clicks corresponded to binary code, the fundamental language of computers and digital communication. But the message they contained was older than computers, older than human civilization. The message, when translated, was coordinates. Hundreds of coordinates, scattered across every ocean on Earth. Marcus had cross-referenced them with deep-sea topographical maps. Each coordinate corresponded to a deep ocean trench, the 𝒄𝒄 Trench, the Java Trench, the Puerto Rico Trench. Every major deep point in our oceans. They're not isolated. They're not alone. They're networked, communicating across thousands of miles of ocean, in complete darkness, under crushing pressure that nothing else can survive. And somehow, they've learned our language, or at least figured out how to mimic it. The last thing Marcus told me before he disappeared was that he'd listened to the entire 8-hour recording from that night. Toward the end, buried beneath the layers of clicking and breathing, there was something else. A countdown. He couldn't decipher what it was counting down to, but it was consistent across all the creature's vocalizations. A synchronized countdown, happening in every deep trench on the planet simultaneously. That was 16 months ago. I left the institute 6 months after that. I now teach marine biology at a small community college in Colorado, as far from the ocean as I can get. But sometimes, late at night, I search for news about unusual deep-sea seismic activity or strange sounds detected by naval submarines. The Navy's SOSUS array has been picking up more unexplained sounds in the past year than in the previous 2 decades combined. Last week, I got an email from an unknown sender. No message, just an attachment. It was an audio file, 10 seconds long. I almost deleted it without listening, but something made me click play. It was the sound. The breathing. The clicking. But this time, it wasn't coming from 7 miles deep. The audio metadata showed it was recorded at a depth of only 600 feet, off the coast of California, less than 20 miles from a major metropolitan area. They're rising. Whatever exists in the deepest parts of our oceans, whatever those creatures are, they're moving up toward the surface. And after analyzing that final audio file through a spectrum analyzer, I found one more message buried in the clicking pattern. We are coming. I haven't slept properly in 3 days. I keep the lights on in my apartment, even though I'm hundreds of miles from the nearest ocean. Because I know what's down there now. I know that we've been sharing this planet with something vast and intelligent and utterly alien, something that has been watching us from the darkness of the deepest trenches. And the most terrifying part? The scientific community won't acknowledge it. Every report gets classified or dismissed. Every recording gets confiscated or explained away. We're keeping the biggest discovery in human history a secret because the truth is too terrifying to accept. But I'm not supposed to know any of this. I'm not supposed to have these files, these recordings, this knowledge. So I'm telling this story now, putting it out there, because I need someone else to know. I need the truth to exist somewhere besides in my nightmares. If you ever hear about mass strandings of deep-sea creatures, or unusual bioluminescent events in coastal waters, or unexplained sounds recorded by ocean monitoring systems, remember this story. Remember that we've only explored 5% of our oceans. Remember that the deepest parts remain as mysterious to us as the surface of another planet. And remember that sometimes, the monsters we imagine in the darkness are real. They're just much, much deeper than we ever thought to look. The countdown is still happening. Marcus calculated that, based on the rate of change in the clicking patterns, it would reach 0 sometime in the next 18 months. I don't know what happens when it reaches 0. I don't know if anyone does. But I know I'll be as far inland as possible when it does. Story 2, The Bloop's Answer. My name is Lieutenant Commander David Kessler, and I spent 12 years as a sonar operator for the United States Navy before what happened in the summer of 2022 made me walk away from everything. They gave me an honorable discharge and a non-disclosure agreement that could land me in federal prison for the rest of my life if I violated. But I'm 63 years old now, and I have terminal cancer. They can't touch me anymore. Someone needs to know what we found. You've probably heard of the bloop. Back in 1997, NOAA's autonomous hydrophone arrays picked up an ultra-low frequency underwater sound that was detected over 3,000 miles away. Scientists said it was probably an ice wake, an iceberg calving or cracking. The sound was too loud, they claimed, to be biological. Nothing living could produce a sound that powerful, that far-reaching. They were wrong. I was stationed at the naval facility on the Ascension Island, part of SOSUS, the sound surveillance system that the Navy has operated since the Cold War. Our job was to listen, to track submarines, to monitor underwater seismic activity, to map the acoustic signature of every inch of the Atlantic Ocean. We heard things down there that never made it into official reports. Strange sounds, impossible sounds, sounds that made experienced operators request transfers. But we were trained to ignore the weird stuff, to focus on what mattered: foreign submarines, underwater drones, anything that posed a strategic threat. The unexplained biological sounds were noted, filed, and forgotten. That was the protocol. Until June 15, 2022, when the bloop happened again. I was on the night shift with two other operators, Petty Officer Rodriguez and Ensign Taylor, a kid fresh out of training who still thought submarine duty was glamorous. We were monitoring the South Atlantic, routine sweep patterns, when every hydrophone in our array lit up simultaneously. The sound was identical to the 1997 recording. I'd heard the original bloop dozens of times during training. It was used as an example of unexplained acoustic phenomena. But hearing it live, in real time, through military-grade hydrophones designed to pick up a whisper from 100 miles away, it was different. It was terrifying. The sound started at ultra-low frequency, below the range of human hearing, but our equipment translated it into something we could perceive. It sounded like a living thing, like something breathing or calling out. It rose in pitch over the course of about a minute, then dropped sharply and went silent. "Sir, I'm getting a source location," Rodriguez said, her fingers flying across her console. 2,000 nautical miles southwest of our position. Depth reading is, that can't be right. "What's the depth?" I asked, moving behind her to check her screen. 17,000 feet, sir. But the source pressure signature suggests it's coming from much deeper. The sound is bouncing off the seamount ranges, but origin point. She looked up at me with wide eyes. Origin point is showing as 23,000 feet. That's impossible. There's no trench that deep in this region. Taylor was pulling up bathymetric maps, his young face scrunched in concentration. "She's right, Commander. The deepest point in this area is the 𝒉𝒂 Gap at about 25,000 feet, but that's 400 miles from this location. According to the charts, the source point is showing as the Mid-Atlantic Ridge at only 12,000 feet maximum depth. Run a full diagnostic on the array," I ordered. "Check for equipment malfunction." But even as I said it, I knew the equipment was fine. I could feel it in my bones, that primal instinct that every sonar operator develops after years of listening to the ocean. Something was down there, something that had just announced its presence to every listening station in the Atlantic. The diagnostic came back clean. All systems functioning normally. The sound had been real, and it had been exactly where our equipment said it was, in a place that shouldn't be deep enough to hide anything of significant size. "Contact command," I said. "Full report, all data. Market priority Alpha." Rodriguez made the call while I continued to monitor the hydrophones. The ocean had gone quiet after the bloop, eerily quiet. Usually, there's a constant background of biological noise, shrimp clicking, whales singing, the ambient sound of water moving and life existing. But now there was nothing. It was like every living thing in a 1,000-mile radius had gone silent. "Sir, command wants us to maintain continuous monitoring and report any additional activity," Rodriguez said. "They're scrambling a P-8 Poseidon from the mainland to investigate." We waited. Hours passed. The ocean remained silent. I sent Taylor to grab coffee and food from the mess, trying to maintain some normalcy, but the atmosphere in the operations room was tense. Rodriguez kept checking and rechecking her equipment, looking for some explanation that made sense. At 0342 hours it happened again. But this time it was different. The sound started the same way, that low-frequency pulse that made our speakers hum. But then it changed. It split into multiple sounds, harmonizing with itself, creating a pattern that was clearly, undeniably deliberate. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a signal. "Oh my God," Taylor whispered. "It's talking. That thing is trying to talk." "Ensign, maintain your composure," I snapped, but my heart was racing. He was right. The pattern was too complex, too structured to be random. It repeated 3 times, with slight variations, like someone trying to find the right frequency or pronunciation. Then we heard the response. It came from a different location, about 500 miles from the first source. Another bloop, but higher pitched, shorter in duration. Then another response from yet another location. Then another. Within 5 minutes, we were tracking 7 distinct sources, all producing variations of the bloop sound, all communicating with each other across thousands of miles of ocean. "They're networked," Rodriguez said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jesus Christ, Commander, they're having a conversation." I grabbed the secure phone and called command directly. "This is Kessler at Ascension. We have multiple unknown contacts producing acoustic signatures consistent with the 1997 bloop anomaly. Contacts appear to be communicating with each other in a coordinated pattern. Recommend immediate escalation to Sublant and CNO." The voice on the other end was Captain Morrison, the facility commander. "Stand by, Commander. We're seeing the same thing here. SOSUS arrays across the Atlantic are all picking this up. Whatever these things are, they're not trying to hide anymore." The communication continued for 17 minutes. We recorded everything, tracking each source, mapping the pattern of their exchanges. They were spread across the entire Atlantic basin, from the Caribbean to the coast of Africa, all calling to each other in that strange, resonant voice that seemed to come from the very depths of the earth. Then, suddenly, they all went silent again. But this time, the silence was different. This time, we could hear something moving. Our passive sonar arrays, designed to detect submarines at extreme range, started picking up cavitation sounds, the noise made by something large moving through water. But these sounds were massive, unlike anything in our acoustic database. Whatever was making them was big, and there were dozens of them, all converging on a single point in the mid-Atlantic. "Get me a visual," I ordered. "Where's that P8? "Still 30 minutes out, sir," Taylor reported. "We don't have 30 minutes. Pull up any satellite coverage we have of this area. Traffic monitoring, weather satellites, anything with a camera pointed at this section of ocean." Rodriguez worked her magic with the intelligence networks. Within 5 minutes, she had access to European weather satellite that was passing over the target area. The infrared imagery came up on our main screen. What we saw made no sense. The ocean surface in a 10-mile radius around the source point was glowing. Not reflecting light, glowing. Producing its own heat signature that was registering on the satellite's sensors. The water temperature had increased by 15 degrees Celsius in a matter of minutes. "Something's coming up from below," I said. "Something's generating massive amounts of heat." The P8 Poseidon arrived on station at 0421 hours. The pilot's report came through our speakers, his voice professionally calm but with an undercurrent of tension. "Ascension, we have visual on the target area. There's significant bioluminescence visible from 10,000 feet. The entire area is lit up like a city. We're deploying sonarbeams for acoustic analysis." The sonarbeams hit the water and immediately started transmitting. The sounds they picked up made every operator in the room freeze. It wasn't the bloop anymore. It was something else, something that sounded almost mechanical, like massive gears grinding against each other deep beneath the surface. But mixed with it was that same biological quality, that sense of something living, something breathing. "Ascension, we have multiple large contacts on sonar," the P8 pilot reported. "Showing as biologics, but the size estimates don't make sense. Largest contact is reading at over 800 feet in length. Repeat, 800 feet. Depth is, they're at 4,000 feet and rising. Get out of there," I said into the radio. Aircraft, break contact and return to base. Sir, we're at 10,000 feet. We're well clear of. The pilot's voice cut off. For 3 seconds, there was silence. Then we heard him again, and this time the professional calm was gone. Something just breached the surface. Holy Mother of God, it's massive. It's static. The transmission cut out completely. P8, do you copy? I called. P8, respond. Nothing. The aircraft's transponder had gone dark. 8 crew members, $100 million worth of equipment, just gone. Rodriguez was frantically switching between different sensor systems, trying to figure out what had happened. Sir, I'm showing a massive disturbance on the surface. The infrared signature is off the charts. Whatever came up, it's big enough to create its own weather system. I'm seeing clouds forming directly over the target area. What about the P8? Taylor asked, his voice cracking. What happened to them? Before anyone could answer, the hydrophones picked up another sound. This one was different from all the others. It was the bloop, but modified, altered. And hidden within it, barely perceptible, was something that made my blood run cold. It was human speech. Distorted, layered with that deep resonance, but unmistakably human words. The same words, repeated over and over in different voices, like a recording of multiple people speaking in unison. We have been waiting. We are ready. You have awakened us. Rodriguez yanked off her headphones, her face pale. That was the P8 crew. Those were their voices. How the hell? Lock down this facility. I ordered. No one in or out. Encrypt all recordings and prepare for immediate transmission to Subland. Move! The next 6 hours were chaos. Reports started flooding in from SOSA stations around the world. The same thing was happening in every ocean. Bloop-like sounds, coordinated communication, massive objects rising from the deepest trenches. Ships were going missing. Aircraft were losing contact. Coastal areas were reporting massive swells and unusual bioluminescent events. By noon, every major naval power in the world had ships converging on these locations. I monitored the reports as they came in. A Russian destroyer in the Pacific reported multiple supersized contacts before going silent. A Chinese submarine surfaced near the Mariana Trench, the crew babbling about creatures with lights and voices. They were all reporting the same thing. Something had been sleeping in the deep ocean, and we had somehow woken it up. The last transmission I received before they shut down our facility and scattered the crew came from a research vessel in the Antarctic. They had lowered a ROV into the South Sandwich Trench, trying to get visual confirmation of what was down there. The video feed showed something that my brain still refuses to fully process. There were structures down there. Not natural formations, but constructed architecture, massive and ancient, covered in centuries of sediment and biological growth. And moving through these structures were things that looked like a nightmare fusion of whale and squid and something else, something that had never evolved under the sun. They had eyes, dozens of them, that glowed with their own light. And they were looking up, directly at the camera, as if they could see through 7 miles of water and darkness. The ROV's final transmission before the cable was severed showed one of these creatures opening what might have been a mouth. Inside were not teeth, but something that looked almost like circuitry, bioluminescent patterns that pulsed with electrical energy. And from this mouth came a sound that our equipment translated into words. The deep is ours. The surface will be again. They evacuated Ascension Island 3 days later. Official story was a gas leak, routine safety protocols. We were all separated, debriefed individually, and given our NDAs. Most of the data was classified above top secret. The few recordings that were released to the scientific community were doctored, cleaned up, made to sound like natural phenomena. But I kept copies. Hidden in encrypted files, buried in legacy systems that the brass didn't know to check. And I've been watching the news ever since. The reports are there if you know how to look for them. Increased deep-sea seismic activity worldwide. Unusual mass strandings of deep-sea creatures showing signs of surface adaptation. Naval exercises being suddenly cancelled with no explanation. Fishing boats reporting their sonar systems detecting massive objects at depths that should be empty. And the sounds. They never stopped. Every SOSA station in the world is picking them up now daily. The creatures are still talking to each other, coordinating across thousands of miles. The Navy has a task force dedicated to monitoring them, but they don't release any information. They don't want people to know. But I'm telling you now because I'm dying and I don't care about their threats anymore. Something is down there, something intelligent and ancient and vast beyond comprehension. The bloop wasn't an anomaly or an ice quake. It was them, announcing themselves after centuries or millennia of silence. We always assumed that if we encountered alien intelligence, it would come from space. We never considered that it might have been here all along, in the 95% of the ocean we've never explored, waiting in the crushing darkness of the deep. They're not hiding anymore. They're preparing for something. And whatever countdown they're following, whatever plan they're executing, we're not ready for it. We're not even close to ready. Last night, I was listening to a smuggled recording from a SOSA station in the Pacific. The bloop sounds have changed again. They're faster now, more frequent, more urgent. And buried within them, if you listen carefully, you can hear something else. It sounds like construction. Like massive machines working in the depths, building or assembling or preparing something enormous. The ocean covers 71% of our planet. The deepest parts reach 7 miles down, where the pressure would crush us instantly, where no light has ever penetrated, where the temperature hovers just above freezing. We've sent humans to the moon, robots to Mars, but we've barely touched the true depths of our own oceans. And now I know why. Because something was already down there. Something that doesn't want to be found. Something that's been watching and waiting and growing in the dark. The bloop was their way of talking to each other. But that last transmission, those words spoken in human voices, that was them talking to us. And the message was clear. They know we're here, they know what we're capable of, and they're not afraid. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if anyone does. But I know this, the deep ocean isn't empty. It never was. And whatever shares this planet with us, whatever has been living in those crushing depths for God knows how long, it's decided that it's time to make contact. Or maybe it's time for something else. Something worse. I sleep with the lights on now, even though I'm hundreds of miles from any ocean. Because I've heard their voices. I've heard them speaking in the dark, in frequencies that humans were never meant to perceive. And I know that the deep is not silent. It's never been silent. It's been listening, learning, waiting. And now, the waiting is over. Story 3, The Midnight Zone Migration. My name is Dr. 𝒂𝒏𝒄𝒆, and I used to be a marine biologist specializing in deep-sea migration patterns. I say, used to be, because after what I witnessed during the autumn of 2023, I can never look at the ocean the same way again. I've tried to go back to my research, tried to pretend that what I saw was explainable, quantifiable, something that could fit into our current understanding of marine biology. But I can't. Because what's happening in the midnight zone of our oceans defies everything we thought we knew about life on Earth. The midnight zone, or the bathypelagic zone, extends from 3,000 to 13,000 feet below the surface. It's called the midnight zone because no sunlight penetrates that deep. It's a world of perpetual darkness, near freezing temperatures, and crushing pressure. We've always assumed that life there was sparse, limited to a few hardy species adapted to the extreme conditions. We were catastrophically wrong. I was part of an international research team aboard the vessel Nautilus Explorer, conducting a 6-month study of vertical migration patterns in the eastern Pacific. Vertical migration is a well-documented phenomenon where deep-sea creatures rise toward the surface at night to feed, then descend back to the depths during the day. It's considered the largest migration of biomass on the planet, happening every single day in oceans around the world. But what we discovered wasn't normal migration. It was something else entirely. Something organized. Something that suggested intelligence on a scale we never imagined possible. It started on October 3, 2023. We were positioned about 200 miles off the coast of Costa Rica, in an area where the continental shelf drops away into a deep ocean basin. Our equipment included a vertical array of hydrophones and cameras extending from the surface down to 15,000 feet, giving us an unprecedented view of the midnight zone and the creatures that inhabit it. Dr. James Park, our team leader, had developed a new imaging system using bioluminescence-triggered cameras. Instead of using lights that would scare away the creatures, we waited for them to produce their own light, and that's when our cameras would activate. It was brilliant, really. It allowed us to observe deep-sea life behaving naturally, without the disruption of artificial illumination. The first anomaly appeared at 11:47 p.m. I was monitoring the camera feeds with my colleague, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, when every camera at the 9,000-foot level activated simultaneously. The entire array lit up with bioluminescent organisms, but they weren't scattered randomly like we'd always observed before. They were arranged in patterns. "Elena, are you seeing this?" Yuki leaned closer to her monitor, adjusting the contrast. "That's not natural distribution. That's formation movement." She was right. Thousands of deep-sea creatures, squid, jellyfish, fish species we couldn't immediately identify, were moving in synchronized patterns. They formed what looked like geometric shapes, holding their positions relative to each other with impossible precision. Hexagons, perfect circles, straight lines extending for hundreds of feet. Could it be current patterns? I suggested, though I knew it wasn't. Deep ocean currents don't create geometric shapes. Not at this depth and with this precision, Yuki said. Look at the timing. They're pulsing their bioluminescence in sequence. It's deliberate. We watched for 20 minutes as the patterns shifted and changed. The creatures would form one shape, hold it for exactly 30 seconds, then flow into another formation. It was like watching a marching band at halftime, except these were deep-sea organisms that supposedly had no capacity for complex coordination or communication. "We need to call James," I said, reaching for the ship's intercom. Within minutes, our entire team was crammed into the monitoring room, watching the screens in stunned silence. Dr. Park was frantically taking notes, his hands shaking slightly. Our acoustics specialist, 𝒉𝒂𝒄, had his headphones on, listening to the hydrophone feeds. "They're making sounds," Marcus said quietly. "Not just the usual clicks and pops. There's a pattern to it. Low-frequency pulses, almost like sonar, but much more complex." "Can you isolate the pattern?" Dr. Park asked. Marcus worked his console, filtering out background noise and enhancing the signal. What came through the speakers made everyone in the room fall silent. It was rhythmic, precise, and undeniably artificial sounding. A series of pulses that varied in frequency and duration, creating what almost sounded like music or language. "How many organisms are producing this sound?" Dr. Park asked. Marcus checked his readings. "All of them, sir. Every creature in the formation is contributing to the signal. They're harmonizing, creating a collective sound that's much more powerful than any individual could produce." "That's impossible," said Dr. Lisa Morrison, our team's evolutionary biologist. "These species don't even interact with each other under normal circumstances. Some of them are predator and prey. They shouldn't be cooperating like this." But they were. And as we continued to watch, the formations grew larger. More creatures were joining from the surrounding water, adding themselves to the patterns. By 1 a.m., we estimated there were over 10,000 organisms participating in what we were now calling the event. Then, at exactly 1:13 a.m., everything stopped. The bioluminescence cut off simultaneously across all the creatures. The acoustic signal ceased. For 30 seconds, the midnight zone went completely dark and silent. When the lights came back on, the formations had changed. The creatures had arranged themselves into something new, something that made my blood run cold when I recognized what I was looking at. It was a map. A three-dimensional map of the ocean floor, rendered in living light by thousands of deep-sea creatures. We could see the contours of underwater mountains, the edges of the continental shelf, even what looked like trenches and canyons. But there were additions to the map that didn't match our charts. Strange structures, geometric shapes positioned at specific locations across the seafloor. "What are we looking at?" Yuki whispered. Dr. Park was comparing the living map to our sonar charts of the area. "These formations here, here, and here." He pointed to spots on the screen where clusters of creatures were concentrated. "They're marking locations that show anomalous readings on our bathymetric surveys. Places where the seafloor depth doesn't match the surrounding terrain. We flagged them as possible survey errors." "What if they weren't errors?" I said. "What if there's actually something there?" "You're suggesting these creatures are trying to show us something?" Dr. Morrison looked skeptical. "That would require not just intelligence, but an understanding of human mapping conventions and a desire to communicate with us. That's multiple levels of cognitive sophistication beyond anything we've ever attributed to deep-sea life." "Then how do you explain what we're seeing?" Yuki challenged. "This isn't random. This isn't instinct. This is intentional communication." Before Dr. Morrison could respond, Marcus held up his hand for silence. "They're doing it again. New acoustic pattern, much more complex this time." The sound that came through the speakers was different from before. It had structure that reminded me of human language, distinct phonemes, pauses that could be interpreted as words or sentences, even variation in pitch that suggested questions and answers. But it was layered with multiple voices speaking simultaneously, creating harmonics that were beautiful and disturbing at the same time. "Can you separate the individual signals?" Dr. Park asked. Marcus worked for several minutes, using advanced filtering software. "I can isolate about 20 distinct sources, but they're all synchronized. It's like they're different instruments in an orchestra, each playing their part to create a complete composition." "Record everything," Dr. Park ordered. "Every camera angle, every acoustic signature. We need complete documentation of this event." The creatures maintained their map formation for another hour. During that time, we sent down an ROV to get closer footage. As the remote vehicle descended toward the formation, something remarkable happened. The creatures didn't scatter or flee like marine life normally does when confronted with an unknown object. Instead, they adjusted their positions, opening a path for the ROV to pass through their formation. "They know it's there," I said, watching the screen. "They're accommodating it." The ROV's high-definition cameras captured incredible detail. We could see individual species we'd never observed before: fish with elongated bodies covered in light-producing organs, squid with tentacles that seemed to have articulated joints allowing for complex manipulation, jellies with neural structures far more developed than anything in the scientific literature. And they were all watching the ROV with what looked disturbingly like awareness. As the ROV reached the center of the formation, the creatures began to pulse their lights in a sequence that moved through the group like a wave. It started with organisms on the outer edge and traveled inward, each creature lighting up in turn, creating a visible flow of information through the living network. "It's like neurons firing," Yuki said, awe in her voice. "They're functioning as a distributed intelligence. A collective consciousness." The ROV's instruments began picking up electromagnetic readings. Weak fields, but present, emanating from clusters of organisms. Marcus ran an analysis and looked up with wide eyes. "They're generating electrical signals similar to brain waves. Not individually, the signal strength from a single organism would be negligible. But together, they're creating a field strong enough to measure from the surface. A collective brain," Dr. Park said softly. "They've organized themselves into a single thinking entity." At 2:47 a.m., the formation began to move. All 10,000 plus organisms started ascending in unison, maintaining their geometric patterns as they rose through the water column. We tracked them on every sensor we had. They passed through 6,000 feet, then 4,000, then 2,000. "They're coming to the surface," Dr. Morrison said, and I could hear genuine fear in her voice. "What happens when they reach the surface?" We were about to find out. At 3:15 a.m., the first organisms broke through into open air. The ocean around our ship began to glow with bioluminescent light. Creatures that should never survive outside the crushing pressure of the deep were floating on the surface, their lights pulsing in that same rhythmic pattern we'd been observing all night. I ran up to the deck with half the team. The sight that greeted us was something out of a fever dream. The ocean in every direction was alive with light, stretching to the horizon. Millions of deep-sea organisms covered the surface, and they were all pulsing in synchronization, creating waves of light that rolled across the water like aurora borealis. Look! Yuki pointed upward. The bioluminescent display was so bright it was illuminating the clouds above us, creating a green-blue glow in the sky that could probably be seen from shore, 200 miles away. Dr. Park was on his satellite phone, trying to contact other research vessels in the area. "This isn't just happening here," he said after a few minutes. "I'm getting reports from ships across the Pacific. Same phenomenon, same timing. Whatever this is, it's coordinated on a global scale." The acoustic signal changed again. Marcus, monitoring from the deck with portable equipment, listened with intense concentration. "They're not trying to communicate with each other anymore," he said. "This signal is directed upward. They're broadcasting to the surface, to the air, to us. Can you translate it?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. "I can try running it through pattern recognition software, see if there's any correspondence to known communication systems." He connected his equipment to a laptop and started the analysis. The creatures maintained their surface display for exactly 1 hour. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. The lights went out. The organisms began to sink, descending back into the darkness from which they'd come. Within 20 minutes, the ocean surface was empty again, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Something that would change everything. Marcus got results from his analysis 3 days later. He'd been running the acoustic patterns through every database available: animal communication, human languages, even mathematical sequences and musical scales. What he found made him call an emergency meeting of the entire team. "The signal is structured," he began, pulling up waveform graphics on the main monitor. "It's not language in the way we understand it, but it's definitely information transfer. And I found correlations. The signal contains sequences that match electromagnetic frequencies used in satellite communications, GPS coordinates, even binary code." "That's impossible," Dr. Morrison said. "How could deep-sea organisms know about human technology?" "They don't know about it," Marcus said. "They're mimicking it. They've been exposed to it, our sonar, our undersea cables, our submarine communications, and they've learned to replicate the patterns. But more than that, they've learned what those patterns mean." "What was the message?" Dr. Park asked quietly. Marcus hesitated, then pulled up a translation he'd worked out with help from colleagues in cryptography and linguistics. "It's crude, probably filtered through their understanding of the signals they've intercepted. But the core message is clear: surface dwellers, the deep is changing. What sleeps below is waking. The waters rise. The pressure comes. We are the first. We bring warning." No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Yuki said what we were all thinking. "Warning about what?" "I don't know," Marcus said. "But 3 hours after the event, seismometers across the Pacific Rim started detecting unusual activity. Low-frequency tremors originating from the deepest ocean trenches. Not earthquakes, something else. Something rhythmic and sustained, like massive machinery operating deep beneath the seafloor." I accessed the seismic data myself later that evening. Marcus was right. The signals were unlike any geological activity in the records. They were too regular, too persistent. And they were spreading. Trenches all over the world were showing the same anomalous readings. Over the next month, we documented 3 more migration events. Each time, more species participated. Each time, the formations were more complex. Each time, the message became clearer. Something was happening in the deepest parts of the ocean. The creatures of the Midnight Zone could sense it, and they were trying to warn us. But warn us about what? The last event we observed before our funding was mysteriously pulled and our research classified was different from the others. The creatures didn't form patterns or create light displays. They all swam in the same direction, away from the deep ocean and toward the continental shelf, toward the shallows, toward land. It was a mass exodus, the largest migration in recorded history. When I asked Marcus if he'd captured any acoustic signals during the event, his face went pale. "Just one," he said. "Repeated over and over by every organism simultaneously." "What was it?" He played the recording. Through the complex harmonics and layered frequencies, I could make out a single word in English, spoken in thousands of voices. "Flee." That was 8 months ago. Since then, I've been monitoring reports from around the world. Deep-sea creatures are appearing in shallow water with increasing frequency. Species that should be dead from pressure changes are adapting, surviving, thriving in environments where they shouldn't exist. It's as if they're being pushed out of their natural habitats by something, forced to evolve at an impossible rate to survive in new territory. And the tremors from the deep trenches continue. They're getting stronger, more frequent. Last week, a research submarine exploring the Mariana Trench captured video before all contact was lost. The footage shows the trench floor cracking open, not from geological forces, but from something pushing up from below. Something massive. Something that's been buried beneath the ocean floor for so long we never knew it was there. The creatures of the Midnight Zone knew. They could feel it stirring. And they tried to warn us. I don't work in marine biology anymore. I've moved inland, as far from any ocean as I can get. But I still follow the news, still track the reports of strange phenomena in the deep sea. And I know that whatever's coming, we're not ready for it. The Midnight Zone migration wasn't random. It was purposeful. It was intelligent. And it was a warning that we ignored because we couldn't accept that creatures we considered primitive could be trying to save us. But they were. They are. And now it might be too late. The deep is waking up. And when it fully opens its eyes, when it finally rises to the surface, the world as we know it will be over. The creatures knew. They fled. Maybe we should have listened. Maybe we should have fled too. But we didn't. We stayed. We dismissed the warning as natural phenomenon, as interesting data, as explainable through conventional science. And now, as the tremors grow stronger and the waters begin to rise, I understand what the creatures were really telling us. It's not the deep that's waking. It's what lives beneath the deep. What's been sleeping below the deepest trenches, in places we can't reach, can't explore, can't even imagine. And it's hungry. Story 4: The Pressure Walkers. My name is Thomas Brennan, and I used to work as a deep-sea salvage diver for oceanic recovery systems. The key word there is used to. What I encountered at the bottom of the Tonga Trench in January 2024 ended my career, my marriage, and very nearly my sanity. I'm telling this story now because I need people to understand that we're not alone down there. We've never been alone. And what lives in the crushing darkness of the deepest ocean doesn't follow the rules of biology we've spent centuries establishing. I'd been in the salvage business for 15 years. My specialty was deep-sea recovery using atmospheric diving suits, those Iron Man-looking rigs that let you walk on the ocean floor at depths that would turn an unprotected human into paste. I'd recovered black boxes from plane crashes, salvaged cargo from sunken freighters, and even retrieved scientific equipment from failed deep-sea expeditions. I was good at my job. I was careful. I was rational. I'm not rational anymore. The job that changed everything seemed routine at first. A private research vessel called the Prometheus had lost a multi-million-dollar sensor array in the Tonga Trench, one of the deepest points in the Pacific Ocean. The array had been studying seismic activity when its tether snapped during a storm. It sank to the bottom, almost 36,000 feet down, and the company wanted it back. The data it contained was apparently worth the astronomical cost of sending me down to retrieve it. The Prometheus was anchored above the trench when I arrived via helicopter. The crew was smaller than I expected, just 6 people, all scientists or technicians, led by a woman named Dr. Patricia Holden. She was in her 50s, with the kind of intensity in her eyes that comes from spending too many years staring at data that doesn't make sense. "Mr. Brennan, thank you for coming on such short notice," she said as I stepped onto the deck. I trust the company briefed you on the recovery parameters? 35,800 feet, give or take, I replied. That's pushing the limits of even the newest ADS units, but it's doable. What was this sensor array measuring that's worth the risk? Dr. Holden exchanged a glance with one of her colleagues before answering. Seismic activity and acoustic anomalies. We've been detecting unusual pressure variations in this trench for the past 6 months. The array was designed to pinpoint the source. And did it? Before you lost it? Yes, she said quietly. That's why we need it back. The data it collected in its final hours of operation, it's unprecedented. It's also classified, which is why I can't tell you more. I should have walked away right then. Classified meant government contracts, which meant complications. But the pay was triple my usual rate, and I had bills to pay and an ex-wife who wanted her alimony checks on time. So I nodded and started prepping my equipment. The atmospheric diving suit they provided was state-of-the-art, a brand new model rated for depths up to 40,000 feet. It was essentially a small submarine shaped like a human, with articulated joints for arms and legs, external manipulator claws, and enough life support to keep me alive for 72 hours if something went wrong. The thing cost more than my house. We began the descent at 0600 hours the next morning. The suit was lowered by a reinforced cable from a specialized winch system, with multiple redundancies in case of failure. I had cameras mounted on the helmet giving me a 360-degree view, lights powerful enough to illuminate a football field, and enough instrumentation to make a fighter pilot jealous. The first 1,000 feet were familiar territory, the sunlight zone, where I could still see the hull of the Prometheus above me. Then came the twilight zone, where the light faded to deep blue and the temperature dropped. By 3,000 feet, I was in complete darkness, my lights the only illumination in an infinite void. The descent took over 4 hours. I watched the depth gauge climb steadily, 10,000 feet, 20,000, 30,000. At these depths, the pressure outside the suit was over 15,000 pounds per square inch. Enough to compress a styrofoam cup to the size of a thimble. Enough to kill me instantly if the suit failed. At 35,000 feet, I reached the bottom of the Tonga Trench. The seafloor here was unlike anything in the shallower depths. It was a landscape of alien geometry, sharp ridges of volcanic rock, deep crevasses that vanished into darkness even my lights couldn't penetrate, and a fine sediment that rose in clouds with every step I took. "Brennan, do you copy?" Dr. Holden's voice came through my comm system, distorted by the distance but clear enough. "Copy. I'm on the bottom. Beginning search pattern for the sensor array." "Roger that. Be advised, we're picking up unusual acoustic readings in your vicinity. Nothing dangerous, just anomalous. Stay alert." I'd heard that word too many times already on this job. Anomalous. It was starting to worry me. The search took longer than expected. The array's emergency beacon was malfunctioning, giving only intermittent signals. I had to walk a grid pattern across the trench floor, my suit's heavy boots leaving deep impressions in the sediment. The landscape down here was eerily beautiful in my lights. Fields of tube worms, clusters of deep-sea mussels, the occasional translucent shrimp drifting past like ghosts. Then I found the tracks. At first, I thought they were natural formations, just ripples in the sediment caused by deep ocean currents. But currents don't make straight lines. They don't create parallel grooves that extend for hundreds of feet in perfect geometric patterns. "Dr. Holden, are you seeing this?" I angled my camera downward, focusing on the tracks. There was a pause before she responded. "We see it. Can you follow them? See where they lead?" Something in her voice made me hesitate. She didn't sound surprised. She sounded expectant, like she'd been waiting for me to find exactly this. "Doctor, what exactly am I looking for down here? Because those tracks weren't made by your sensor array." "No," she admitted. "They weren't. But the array detected them. That's part of what we're trying to understand. Please, Mr. Brennan, follow the tracks." Against my better judgment, I did. The grooves in the sediment were about 6 inches wide and went deep, as if something very heavy had passed this way. There were multiple parallel tracks, suggesting more than one object, or more than one creature. I followed them for almost a quarter mile. The trench floor began to slope downward into a section that wasn't on any of the bathymetric maps I'd studied. A crack in the seafloor, narrow but deep, extending down into darkness that my lights couldn't fully penetrate. That's when I heard it. A sound came through the suit's external audio sensors, transmitted to my helmet speakers. It was a deep, rhythmic pulse, like footsteps. Heavy footsteps. Coming from somewhere in the darkness ahead. Control, I'm hearing something down here. Mechanical sounds, regular rhythm. Could there be another salvage operation in this area? Negative, Dr. Holden said, her voice tense. You're the only person down there. What you're hearing, that's what the sensor array was recording. That's why we need the data. The footsteps were getting louder and closer. I think I should abort, I said, my hand moving toward the emergency ascent control. Something's moving down here, and I don't. Wait. Dr. Holden's voice was sharp. Mr. Brennan, please. We need visual confirmation. Just wait a few more minutes. Please. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to hit the ascent button and get the hell out of there. But I'd been trained to stay calm in extreme situations, to not panic. So I waited, my lights pointed toward the crack in the seafloor, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Something emerged from the darkness. At first, I thought it was a machine. It was roughly humanoid in shape, 2 legs, a torso, appendages that might have been arms. It was massive, at least 15 feet tall, and it moved with mechanical precision, each step deliberate and measured. But as it came closer and my lights illuminated it fully, I realized it wasn't mechanical at all. It was biological. Or it had been, once. The thing was covered in a shell of some kind, like a crustacean, but the proportions were all wrong. The legs were too long, too jointed, bending at angles that made my eyes hurt. The arms, if that's what they were, ended in clusters of what looked like fingers, but there were too many of them, arranged in a radial pattern. The head was the worst part. It was elongated, almost skull-like, with multiple eyes arranged in a vertical line down the center. The eyes glowed with a dim bioluminescent light. And it was looking at me. Jesus Christ, I whispered. Jesus Christ, what is that? Remain calm, Mr. Brennan, Dr. Holden said, but I could hear the excitement in her voice. Don't make any sudden movements. It's unlikely to be aggressive. We believe they're harmless. They? I said. There's more than one? As if in answer, 2 more of the things emerged from the crack. Then 4 more. Then a dozen. They were all sizes, from 10 feet tall to over 20, all with that same nightmarish biomechanical appearance. And they were all walking, moving with purpose across the trench floor, following the tracks I'd been following. They were migrating, or patrolling, or something else I couldn't begin to understand. One of them changed direction, walking toward me. I froze, my hand hovering over the ascent control. The creature approached until it was less than 10 feet away, close enough that I could see details that made my stomach turn. Its shell wasn't smooth, it was covered in what looked like symbols or patterns, carved or grown into the surface. Complex geometric designs that looked almost like writing. The creature extended one of its arm appendages toward me. The fingers, I counted 16 of them, spread in a radial pattern, reaching toward my suit. I braced for impact, for whatever was about to happen. It touched the suit gently, almost delicately. The fingers probed the metal surface, feeling the joints, the manipulator arms, the camera housings. It was examining me the way a scientist might examine a specimen. Then it did something that made my blood run cold. It tapped on the suit's chest plate 3 times, with perfect rhythm. Knock. 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 And I heard a sound through my external sensors. A voice. Distorted by the water and the pressure and the alien biology producing it, but unmistakably a voice, speaking in patterns that almost sounded like words. Dr. Holden was shouting something in my ear, but I couldn't process it. All I could focus on was this creature, this impossible thing that shouldn't exist, that couldn't exist according to everything we knew about life in the deep ocean, trying to communicate with me. The creature tapped again, more insistently. Then it turned and walked away, joining the others. They moved in formation, following the tracks, heading towards something deeper in the trench. Within minutes, they had vanished back into the darkness, leaving me alone with my pounding heart and my shattered understanding of reality. "Mr. Brennan, are you all right?" Dr. Holden's voice finally penetrated my shock. "What the hell were those things?" I demanded. "What the hell is going on down here?" "We call them pressure walkers," she said. "We've known about them for 18 months. The sensor array was tracking their migration patterns. We believe they live in pockets deep beneath the ocean floor, in caverns and tunnels we can't even map. They come up occasionally, walking across the trench floors, always following the same paths. Why didn't you tell me?" I was shouting now, my fear turning to anger. "Why didn't you warn me that there were, whatever the hell those things are down here?" "Because we needed an unbiased observer. Someone who wouldn't be influenced by preconceptions. Someone who could document their behavior without—" "I'm done," I cut her off. "I'm coming up. Right now." "Mr. Brennan, wait. The sensor array." "To hell with your sensor array." I hit the emergency ascent button. The cable began to retract, pulling me away from the bottom. "You lied to me. You put me in danger. Whatever else you want from down here, you can find someone else to get it." The ascent was the longest 4 hours of my life. I kept watching the cameras, expecting to see those things following me up, climbing the cable, coming after me. But they didn't appear. The darkness remained empty. When I reached the surface and they hauled the suit back onto the deck, I climbed out on shaking legs. Dr. Holden was waiting for me, along with 2 men I hadn't seen before. They were wearing suits, government types, with that unmistakable federal agent demeanor. "Mr. Brennan, we need you to sign some paperwork," one of them said, holding out a tablet. "Non-disclosure agreements. Everything you saw down there is classified." "I don't care about your paperwork," I said. "I want off this ship. Now." "You'll sign the documents first," the agent said, his voice flat. "This is a matter of national security." I signed. What choice did I have? They paid me double the agreed amount as a bonus for my silence, and they helicoptered me back to port that afternoon. But before I left, Dr. Holden pulled me aside. "I'm sorry we weren't honest with you," she said. "But you need to understand how important this is. Those creatures, the pressure walkers, they're not just biological anomalies. They're intelligent. They're technological. They've been down there for longer than human civilization has existed, living under pressure that should make complex life impossible, building things in the darkness that we're only beginning to discover." "Building things?" I stared at her. "What kind of things?" "Structures. Networks. Something that spans the deepest trenches of multiple oceans. We think they're connected, all of them. Part of some vast system we don't understand yet. And recently, they've become more active. The migration patterns are changing. They're moving more frequently in larger groups. It's like they're preparing for something." "Preparing for what?" She looked out at the ocean, at the deceptively calm surface that hid such impossible depths. "We don't know. But 6 months ago, seismographs around the world started detecting coordinated tremors from the deepest trenches. Not earthquakes, something else. Something artificial. The pressure walkers are responding to it, organizing themselves. And whatever they're preparing for, it involves the surface. It involves us." "That's insane," I said, but even as I spoke the words, I knew they were true. I'd seen those things. I'd seen the patterns on their shells, the intelligence in their glowing eyes. They weren't animals. They were something else. "There's one more thing you should know," Dr. Holden said. "That creature that touched your suit, that tried to communicate with you. We've analyzed the audio recording of the sounds it made. They weren't random. It was using a language. Not human, obviously, but structured, with grammar and syntax. And our linguistic analysts managed to translate one phrase it repeated 3 times. What did it say? Wake the sleepers. That's what it was telling you. Wake the sleepers. I left the Prometheus that day and never went back to deep sea diving. The company tried to hire me for other jobs, but I refused. Dr. Holden sent me emails occasionally, updates on the research, but I deleted them without reading. I didn't want to know. I couldn't handle knowing. But 6 months ago, I started having dreams. Dreams of walking on the ocean floor, of following those tracks into darkness, of finding what's at the end. Of finding what the pressure walkers are preparing for. Of finding the sleepers. And 3 weeks ago, I saw the news reports. Unprecedented seismic activity in deep ocean trenches worldwide. Ships reporting sonar contacts at extreme depths, massive objects moving in coordinated patterns. Coastal areas experiencing unusual tides and pressure changes that oceanographers can't explain. Yesterday, I got a package in the mail. No return address, just a USB drive. When I plugged it in, it contained a single video file, footage from a deep-sea camera, dated 2 weeks ago. The camera was positioned at the edge of the Tonga Trench, looking down into the crack where I'd seen the pressure walkers emerge. The crack was glowing. Not with bioluminescence, but with something else, something that looked almost like artificial light. And rising from the depths, emerging from that glowing crack, were thousands of pressure walkers. More than I could count. All moving in formation, all walking upward through the water column, heading toward the surface. The video ended with a single frame of text. They're waking. The sleepers are waking. The surface is next. I don't sleep anymore. I can't. Because I know what's coming. I felt it down there, in the crushing darkness of the deepest trench on Earth. I felt the presence of something vast and ancient, something that's been waiting for the right moment, the right signal, to rise from the depths and reclaim the surface. The pressure walkers aren't preparing. They're announcing. They're heralds, messengers for something much larger, something that lives even deeper than we've ever explored. Something that sees the surface world as its rightful domain, temporarily abandoned but never forgotten. And now, after millions or billions of years, it's decided to come home. I live in Colorado now, as far from any ocean as I can get in the continental United States. But I know it won't matter. When they come, when the sleepers wake fully and rise from their ancient homes in the cracks beneath the ocean floor, there won't be anywhere far enough away. The pressure walkers can survive at 36,000 feet of depth. They can function under pressure that would destroy any technology we've created. If they can adapt to the surface pressure, if they can walk from the depths to the shore, then nothing will stop them. And based on those tracks I saw, the patterns of their migration, the intelligence in those glowing eyes, I don't think adaptation will be a problem for them at all. They've been waiting, watching, living in a realm so extreme that we convinced ourselves it was lifeless, or at best, populated by primitive creatures struggling to survive. We were wrong. They're not primitive. They're not struggling. They're ancient, advanced, and organized. And they're coming. The deep doesn't belong to us. It never did. We just didn't know who it belonged to until now. And soon, very soon, the surface won't belong to us either. Story 5. The Abyssal Archive. My name is Dr. Rebecca Frost, and I'm a cryptographer who spent 3 years working on the most classified project in the history of marine science. What I discovered in that time destroyed my faith in our understanding of history, evolution, and humanity's place in the world. I'm violating multiple federal laws by telling you this, but at 62 years old with stage 4 lung cancer, the government's threats ring hollow. The truth needs to be told before it's too late, before the archive opens completely, and we lose any chance we might have had to prepare. It started in March 2021 when I received a call from a blocked number. The woman on the other end identified herself as Dr. Sarah Mendoza from DARPA's Advanced Technology Office. She said they needed a cryptographer with my specific skill set for a marine research project. When I asked what marine research had to do with cryptography, she simply said, "We've found something that appears to be a message. We need to know what it says." 2 days later, I was on a military transport to an undisclosed location in the Pacific Ocean. They made me surrender all personal electronics, sign non-disclosure agreements that could put me in prison for life, and submit to a security clearance process so invasive it would have been illegal for any civilian organization. By the time I arrived at the research platform, a massive vessel that looked more like a floating fortress than a research ship, I was beginning to regret my decision. Dr. Mendoza met me on deck. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with the exhausted look of someone who hadn't slept properly in months. "Thank you for coming, Dr. Frost. I know this all seems extreme, but you'll understand once you see what we're dealing with." She led me below deck, through multiple security checkpoints, each one more serious than the last. Armed guards, biometric scanners, pressure-sealed doors. Finally, we entered a massive laboratory space filled with computer equipment, sonar displays, and what looked like linguistic analysis software. About 20 people were working at various stations, all with that same exhausted, haunted look. 3 years ago, Dr. Mendoza began. A geological survey team was mapping the Pacific Ocean floor in preparation for laying a new telecommunications cable. They discovered an anomaly in the ʻCrmatic Trench, about 32,000 feet down. What they thought was a natural rock formation turned out to be something else entirely. She pulled up an image on a large monitor. It showed what looked like a massive cylindrical structure embedded in the trench wall, partially buried by sediment. But the surface wasn't natural rock. It was covered in geometric patterns, precise angles, and what looked disturbingly like panels or plates. "This structure is approximately 3 miles long and half a mile in diameter," she continued. "The material is unlike anything in our geological databases. It's metallic, but not any metal we can identify. It doesn't corrode, doesn't degrade, and carbon dating is impossible because the material doesn't contain any organic compounds. Based on the sediment covering it and the geological formations around it, our best estimate is that it's been there for at least 50 million years." "That's impossible," I said. 50 million years ago, humans didn't exist. Complex civilization didn't exist." "Exactly," Dr. Mendoza said grimly. "Which means whatever built this wasn't human." She pulled up more images. Close-ups of the structure's surface showed intricate designs. Patterns that looked almost like circuitry or writing. "We've been studying this for 3 years. We've sent down over 200 ROV missions, taken thousands of samples, and deployed every scanning technology we have. And 6 months ago, something changed. The structure activated." "Activated?" "It started producing sounds. Complex acoustic patterns at multiple frequencies. It also began emitting weak electromagnetic pulses. At first, we thought it might be responding to our presence, our scanning equipment. But the patterns are too regular, too structured. They're not random. They're organized information. They're a message." She gestured to the room full of equipment and exhausted researchers. "We've had linguists, mathematicians, physicists, and computer scientists all trying to decode this message. We've thrown every cryptographic technique we know at it. Nothing works. The pattern is too complex, too alien. That's where you come in. Your work on non-human communication patterns, your theories about universal mathematical constants as a basis for first contact protocols. We need that expertise." Over the next 3 months, I worked 16-hour days analyzing the acoustic and electromagnetic patterns coming from what we'd started calling the archive. Because that's what it was, clearly, a storage device of some kind, a repository of information placed at the bottom of the ocean millions of years before humans evolved. The patterns were maddeningly complex. They operated on multiple levels simultaneously: frequency, amplitude, timing, phase relationships, even quantum entanglement between certain signal components. Whoever designed this had an understanding of physics and information theory far beyond our current knowledge. But there were constants. Mathematical ratios that appeared repeatedly. The golden ratio. Pi. The fine structure constant. These universal constants gave me a framework to start understanding the language structure. After 6 weeks of analysis, I had a breakthrough. The patterns weren't just one message, There were thousands of messages, all encoded in parallel, like having multiple books written on the same pages using different inks visible only in different spectrums of light. The archive wasn't just storing information, it was a multidimensional database designed to be readable by any intelligence capable of understanding basic physics. "I can decode it," I told Dr. Mendoza during one of our daily briefings. "But you need to understand, this isn't going to be simple. The information density is astronomical. This structure could contain more data than every computer on Earth combined. Decoding all of it could take decades. Start with whatever you can access," she said. "We need to know what this is, who built it, and why it's here." The first section I decoded was what I can only describe as an index or table of contents. It listed categories of information stored in the archive: astronomical data, biological specimens, technological blueprints, historical records, and something labeled in a way that my translation matrix rendered as warnings or prohibitions. I started with the historical records. What I found made my hands shake as I typed. The archive contained a complete history of Earth spanning back over 300 million years. And that history wasn't empty. Long before humans, before dinosaurs, even before most of the geological eras we've named, Earth was inhabited by an intelligent species. They called themselves something my translator couldn't properly render, but the closest approximation was the predecessors. They evolved in Earth's oceans during the Carboniferous period, approximately 320 million years ago. They were nothing like us, more similar to cephalopods or crustaceans, adapted for life under extreme pressure in the deepest ocean trenches. But they were intelligent. Incredibly intelligent. While their environment limited their ability to develop certain technologies we take for granted, fire was impossible underwater, metallurgy required completely different approaches. They mastered other fields we're still struggling with: genetic engineering, quantum computing, manipulation of fundamental forces. And they had millions of years to develop their civilization while life on land was still primitive. The archive showed images, recordings somehow preserved across hundreds of millions of years. Cities built in the deepest trenches, massive structures that worked with the pressure rather than against it. Vessels that could traverse between trenches, carrying inhabitants who would die in the comparatively low-pressure environment of the surface. A civilization that spanned the globe, all in the depths we've barely explored. "This is incredible," Dr. Mendoza breathed as I showed her the decoded records. "But what happened to them? Why haven't we found any archaeological evidence?" "Because they're still here," I said quietly. "They never left." The next section of the archive explained what had happened. Around 250 million years ago, the Permian-Triassic extinction event occurred, the worst mass extinction in Earth's history. 90% of marine species died. The geological record shows massive volcanic activity, ocean acidification, and climate change that made most of the planet uninhabitable. The predecessors saw it coming. They had centuries of warning from their geological models and astronomical observations. They couldn't stop it. It was caused by processes too large and too fundamental to control. But they could survive it. They retreated deeper. They found pockets in the Earth's crust, cracks in the ocean floor that led to massive cavern systems far below even the deepest trenches. They sealed themselves in these refuges and waited for the planet to stabilize. But something went wrong. The geological upheaval was worse than predicted. Many of their refuges were destroyed or sealed off permanently. The survivors were cut off from each other, their civilization fragmented. Over millions of years, isolated in the dark, under crushing pressure, with limited resources, they changed. They adapted. They evolved into something different. "The creatures we've been detecting in the deep trenches," I said, my voice hollow. "The unexplained sonar contacts, the strange bioluminescent swarms, the pressure-adapted organisms that seem too intelligent, too organized. They're not separate species. They're the descendants of the predecessors. They're what's left of Earth's first technological civilization." Dr. Mendoza stared at the decoded information on the screen. "And the archive? They built it before retreating underground. A time capsule. A warning. A message to whoever evolved to intelligence after them. They knew that life would continue, that evolution would produce new intelligent species eventually. They wanted us to know what happened. To know what's coming. What do you mean, what's coming? I pulled up the section labeled Warnings. The information there made my blood run cold. The Permian-Triassic extinction wasn't a one-time event. It was part of a cycle. The archive contained geological data showing that Earth experiences these catastrophic extinction events regularly, roughly every 250 million years. The cause is predictable: the buildup of volcanic CO2, the warming of oceans, the acidification of water, the destabilization of methane hydrates on the ocean floor. Each cycle follows the same pattern. And according to the archive's calculations, we're entering a new cycle now. The warming oceans, the increasing acidity, the unusual seismic activity in deep ocean trenches that scientists have been detecting over the past decade, these aren't random. They're the early warning signs that the next extinction event is beginning. The predecessors included detailed models showing how the cycle progresses. First comes the warming phase, lasting a few thousand years. Then the methane release, triggering runaway heating. Then the ocean dead zones spreading from the depths upward. Finally, the atmospheric collapse as oxygen-producing organisms die off. The whole process, from first warnings to total extinction of most surface life, takes about 10,000 years. We're roughly 2,000 years into the current cycle. That gives us 8,000 years. Dr. Mendoza said, trying to find hope. That's enough time too. That's if the model holds exactly. I interrupted. But the predecessors also left a warning. They weren't the first civilization on Earth. The archive contains fragments of data from an even older species, one that existed before them during a previous cycle. And that civilization left records showing that each extinction cycle is slightly faster than the last. The feedback loops intensify. The collapse accelerates. I pulled up the projections. If the pattern continues, this cycle won't take 10,000 years. It'll take maybe 3,000. And the early phases, the parts that make the planet uninhabitable for surface-dwelling technological species like us, will happen in just a few centuries. The room was silent except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of waves against the hull. There's more, I said, because I had to tell them everything. The predecessors included instructions in the archive. Specifications for technology that could help mitigate the cycle, or at least survive it. Genetic modification techniques that could let humans adapt to extreme conditions. Engineering blueprints for sustainable refuges. Even coordinates for the most stable geological formations where underground facilities might survive. So there's hope, Dr. Mendoza said. Maybe. But there's a complication. The archive isn't just a passive recording. It's been monitoring. It has sensors throughout the deep ocean, still functioning after hundreds of millions of years. And it's been watching what's left of the predecessors' descendants, those pressure-adapted species living in the trenches. I pulled up the most recent data the archive had collected. They're not mindless animals anymore. Over the past few million years, they've been slowly recovering, rebuilding, remembering. The intelligence that allowed their ancestors to create this archive, it's still there, buried in their genetic memory. And they're waking up. The sonar images showed coordinated movement patterns, constructed structures in the deepest trenches, and what looked disturbingly like technology being assembled from materials scraped from the ocean floor. They know the cycle is beginning again. I continued. They've lived through it before, in their ancestral memories passed down through millions of years of evolution. And they're preparing. But not to save surface life. To reclaim the surface once we're gone. Dr. Mendoza's face had gone pale. Are you saying we're in a competition with them? For survival? I'm saying they were here first. They built this civilization, this archive, to preserve their knowledge through extinction cycles. They've survived one cycle already and are preparing to survive another. And from their perspective, we're temporary. We're just another species that evolved during a brief stable period between extinctions. When the cycle completes and the surface becomes uninhabitable again, they'll be ready to emerge from the deep and rebuild. Over the next 2 years, I decoded as much of the archive as possible. The more I learned, the more terrifying it became. The predecessors had mapped the entire cycle, understood the mechanisms, and knew exactly what would happen. They'd included detailed records of the previous extinction, the temperatures, the pH levels, the atmospheric composition, the timeline of collapse. They'd also included their observations of what happened after they went underground. How life on the surface continued, adapted, evolved. How new species rose and fell. How the planet healed itself over millions of years, ready to support complex life again. But the cycle always returned. It was built into Earth's geology, an inevitable consequence of plate tectonics and the carbon cycle and the way our planet's systems interacted. Unless something fundamentally changed about Earth's geological processes, the cycle would continue forever. The really disturbing part was the section about previous cycles before even the predecessors. The fragments of data they'd found suggested that Earth had hosted at least 3 or 4 intelligent civilizations before them, each one rising during a stable period, achieving technology, and then being wiped out when the cycle turned. And each time, the survivors retreated to the deep, evolved, and waited. The deep ocean trenches weren't just the last refuge of the predecessors. They were a graveyard of civilizations, layer upon layer of evolutionary descendants from species that had once dominated the surface. The strange creatures we'd been detecting, the ones that seemed too intelligent, too organized, they might be the descendants of multiple extinct civilizations, all compressed into the same deep ocean ecosystem, all waiting for the surface to become uninhabitable again so they could emerge. 3 months ago, something changed. The archive's activity increased dramatically. The acoustic patterns became more frequent, more intense. It was like watching a computer boot up after being in sleep mode. And then we detected a response. From the deep trenches around the world, we picked up answering signals. The descendants of the predecessors, whatever they'd become, were communicating with the archive. They were accessing it, downloading information, remembering who they used to be. Dr. Mendoza called an emergency meeting. "This is escalating faster than we predicted. Whatever's down there, it's waking up. It's organizing. We need to decide how to handle this." "Handle it how?" I asked. "We can't fight them in their environment. We can barely survive going down there for a few hours in specialized equipment. They live there. It's their home. It's always been their home. Then what do we do? Just wait for the extinction cycle to kill us?" I pulled up the final section of the archive I'd decoded. The predecessors left us a choice. They included instructions for 3 different responses to the cycle. First option, try to stop it. Use advanced technology to stabilize Earth's climate, prevent the methane release, control the volcanic activity. They admitted this probably won't work. They tried it and failed. The forces involved are too large, too interconnected. But the specifications are there if we want to try. Second option, adapt. Modify ourselves to survive in the changing environment. The archive contains genetic blueprints for adaptations that would let humans survive higher temperatures, lower oxygen, more acidic conditions. Essentially, turn ourselves into something that can live through the extinction period. But we wouldn't be human anymore, not really. Third option, retreat. Do what they did. Find deep refuges, seal ourselves in, and wait out the cycle. The archive has coordinates for stable geological formations, designs for sustainable underground facilities, everything we'd need. We could survive. But we'd have to give up the surface world for potentially millions of years. Dr. Mendoza looked at the options on the screen. And if we do nothing? Then in a few hundred years, maybe 1,000 at most, the surface becomes uninhabitable. Humanity goes extinct. And the descendants of the predecessors inherit Earth again, like they've been waiting to do for 250 million years. The meeting ended without a decision. How could there be a decision? We were talking about the fate of the entire human species, based on information from an alien archive at the bottom of the ocean, warning us about an extinction cycle that wouldn't kill us but would kill our great-great-great-grandchildren's descendants 1,000 years from now. But I've seen the data. I've decoded the records. I've watched the geological warning signs that matched perfectly with the archive's predictions. And I've monitored the increasing activity from the deep trenches, the awakening of something that's been waiting in the darkness for longer than humans have existed. Last week, I received word that the project is being shut down. The government has decided the information is too dangerous, too destabilizing. The archive will be sealed, the research classified beyond anyone's clearance level, and everyone who worked on the project will be scattered and silenced. They're making a choice through inaction. They're choosing to do nothing, to let the cycle progress naturally. Because the alternative, telling humanity that we're on a countdown to extinction, that we share the planet with the descendants of a previous intelligent species, that our time on the surface is temporary, is too terrifying to contemplate. But the archive is still there. The descendants are still waking. The cycle is still progressing. And I've made my own choice. I've copied as much data as I could to encrypted storage. I've hidden the locations of the most promising refuge sites. I've preserved the genetic modification specifications and the technology blueprints. Because someone needs to know. Someone needs to be ready. When the oceans warm and the atmosphere turns toxic and civilization collapses, someone needs to have the information to give humanity a chance. The predecessors tried to help us. They left everything we need to survive, to continue, to maybe even break the cycle someday. They didn't have to. They could have let us die in ignorance like the civilizations before them probably did. But they built the archive. They preserved their knowledge. They gave us a warning and a choice. And now I'm giving that warning to you. The deep ocean isn't empty. It's never been empty. It's full of the ghosts of previous worlds, previous civilizations, previous versions of life on Earth. And they're all waiting for the surface to burn so they can inherit it again. We have maybe 1,000 years. Maybe less. The cycle has begun. The archive has awakened. And the question isn't whether humanity will survive. It's what humanity will become in order to survive. The predecessors chose adaptation and retreat. They survived, but they lost everything that made them who they were. What will we choose? And will we make that choice before it's too late? The archive holds the answers. But we're sealing it away, pretending the warning doesn't exist, hoping that ignorance will somehow protect us. It won't. The cycle doesn't care if we acknowledge it or not. The deep doesn't care if we're ready or not. And the descendants of the predecessors are patient. They've been patient for 250 million years. They can wait a little longer.